In a church where faith and trust run deep, no one suspected that behind Pastor Emmanuel's sweet sermons and flashy lifestyle lay a shocking secret, until Brother Dan discovered the hidden room filled with stolen offerings. Pastor Emmanuel had a big church in Abuja. Many people came every Sunday to hear him preach. They clapped their hands and shouted amen, because his words sounded sweet like honey. Pastor Emmanuel wore fine clothes, drove big cars, and lived in a big house. But there was something people didn't know. Pastor Emmanuel was not honest. He wanted money, not just to help the church, but to enjoy himself. He told the congregation to give more and more, saying it was for God's work. "God will bless you if you sow this seed," Pastor Emmanuel said one Sunday, holding a shiny envelope. People trusted him and gave all they could. Some gave their last kobo, hoping for blessings. Brother Dan was a young man who loved God. He joined Pastor Emmanuel's church because he wanted to serve. Pastor Emmanuel made him his assistant. "You will help me collect offerings and count money," Pastor Emmanuel said. Brother Dan was happy. He thought Pastor Emmanuel was a man of God. He worked hard, cleaned the church, and prayed with people. But one day, Brother Dan saw something strange. Pastor Emmanuel took some of the offering money and put it in his own pocket. Brother Dan was confused. Why is Pastor Emmanuel taking God's money for himself? He wondered. He decided to watch closely. One day, Pastor Emmanuel called Brother Dan into his office. "This is where we keep the special offerings," he said, opening a small room behind his desk. Inside, Brother Dan saw bags of money. "This is for God's work," Pastor Emmanuel said, smiling. But Brother Dan noticed the bags never went to help the poor or fix the church. He started to feel worried. Brother Dan prayed every night, asking God to help him know what to do. He knew something was wrong, but he didn't know how to fix it. Pastor Emmanuel's lifestyle was like a rich man's. He bought the latest cars, wore gold watches, and even traveled abroad often. People in the church admired him. "God has blessed Pastor Emmanuel," they would say. But Brother Dan knew the truth. He saw how the church's money was being used. While some members were struggling to feed their families, Pastor Emmanuel was living large. Brother Dan felt sad for the church members. They trusted Pastor Emmanuel, but he was using their money for himself. Brother Dan knew he had to do something, but he was afraid. What if nobody believed him? One Sunday after church, a woman named Sister Amoka came to Pastor Emmanuel. She was crying. "Pastor, I need help. My son is sick, and I don't have money for the hospital," she said. Pastor Emmanuel shook his head. "The church cannot help you now. Sow a seed of faith, and God will provide," he said. Sister Amoka left with tears running down her face. Brother Dan felt bad. He knew there was enough money in the secret room to help her, but Pastor Emmanuel refused. That night, Brother Dan prayed harder than ever. "God, show me what to do. I want to help your people." Brother Dan began to look for evidence. He started writing down everything he saw. Whenever Pastor Emmanuel took money or refused to help someone in need, Brother Dan wrote it in a small notebook. One day, Brother Dan saw Pastor Emmanuel making plans to buy another car. "I will use the special offering from next Sunday," Pastor Emmanuel said, laughing. Brother Dan felt his heart break. He knew the truth must come out, but how? He was just an assistant. "If I speak up, they might call me a liar," he thought. But he kept praying and planning. Pastor Emmanuel stood before the congregation one Sunday with a big smile. "We are building a new church hall," he announced. The members clapped and shouted for joy. Pastor Emmanuel asked for donations. "Give as much as you can. God will bless you," he said. People gave their money happily, thinking it was for a good cause. But Brother Dan knew the truth. Pastor Emmanuel had no plan to build a new church hall. That night, Brother Dan saw Pastor Emmanuel writing down how much he had collected. "This will buy my new car," Pastor Emmanuel said to himself, laughing. Brother Dan couldn't sleep. He knew the people were being lied to, but he was afraid of what might happen if he spoke out. He thought about Sister Amoka and others who were suffering. "I must do the right thing," Brother Dan said to himself. The next day, he wrote a letter explaining everything Pastor Emmanuel had done. He kept it hidden in his bag. Brother Dan also prayed for wisdom. "Lord, help me expose the truth without causing harm," he said. He decided to wait for the right moment to reveal everything. Sister Amoka noticed that Brother Dan looked worried. "Brother Dan, are you okay?" she asked after a service. Brother Dan hesitated, but then he told her everything. "Pastor Emmanuel is using the church's money for himself," he said. Sister Amoka was shocked. "Why don't you tell the congregation?" she asked. Brother Dan explained his fear. "I have evidence, but I need people to believe me," he said. Sister Amoka promised to help. "We will pray together. God will guide us," she said. Her kindness gave Brother Dan courage. One day, Brother Dan found an opportunity to expose Pastor Emmanuel. During a church meeting, Pastor Emmanuel was talking about the new church hall again. Brother Dan stood up and spoke. "Pastor, where is the money we have given for the project?" he asked boldly. The congregation turned to look at Pastor Emmanuel, waiting for his answer. Pastor Emmanuel stammered. We are still collecting," he said. But Brother Dan was ready. He showed his notebook and explained everything he had seen. The congregation was shocked. Some people cried, while others shouted. "How could you lie to us, Pastor?" they said. After Brother Dan spoke, the church became noisy. Some people believed him, while others defended Pastor Emmanuel. "Brother Dan is lying. Pastor Emmanuel is a man of God," one woman shouted. "Why would Brother Dan lie?" another man asked. "He has been faithful to this church." Pastor Emmanuel tried to calm everyone down. "Let's not allow the devil to bring division among us," he said, pretending to be innocent. But Brother Dan stood his ground. "I am telling the truth. I have seen what Pastor Emmanuel does with the money," he said. He showed the congregation the notes he had written down. Sister Amoka stood up and supported Brother Dan. "I believe him," she said. "I came to Pastor Emmanuel for help when my son was sick, but he told me the church had no money. Yet we give offerings every week." Her words touched the hearts of many. People began to question Pastor Emmanuel. "Where is our money?" they asked him. Pastor Emmanuel's face changed. He realized he couldn't talk his way out of this easily. "This is a misunderstanding," he said. But the congregation demanded answers. One brave man in the church, Brother John, suggested they check the secret room Pastor Emmanuel had shown Brother Dan. "If what Brother Dan is saying is true, we will find the money there," he said. Pastor Emmanuel tried to stop them. "No one is allowed in my office without permission," he said, but the members insisted. When they opened the secret room, they found bags of money stacked up. Everyone gasped. "This is where our money has been going," someone shouted. Pastor Emmanuel was caught. He tried to explain, but the people were too angry to listen. That evening, Pastor Emmanuel packed his things and left town. He knew the church members would not forgive him. "I cannot face them anymore," he thought. The news spread quickly. People in the neighborhood began talking about what had happened. "How can a man of God do such a thing?" they asked. The church members were heartbroken. They had trusted Pastor Emmanuel, but he had betrayed them. With Pastor Emmanuel gone, the church members decided to start afresh. They chose Brother John to lead them temporarily while they looked for a new pastor. Brother Dan was happy that the truth had come out, but he felt sad for the people who had been hurt. "I pray God will heal our church," he said. The congregation worked together to use the money they found in the secret room to help the needy and repair the church. Slowly, they began to rebuild their trust in one another. The church was in a mess after Pastor Emmanuel left. People who had supported him felt ashamed, while others were angry and wanted justice. Brother Dan suggested they gather as a congregation to pray and ask for God's guidance. "We need unity to move forward," he said. During the prayer meeting, Sister Amoka spoke. "We must forgive Pastor Emmanuel, even though he hurt us," she said. "If we keep anger in our hearts, we cannot grow as a church." Her words touched many, and they decided to focus on rebuilding. The congregation counted the money they found in the secret room. It was a lot. They decided to use it to help the church and the community. They repaired the church's roof, bought new chairs, and even helped Sister Amoka's son get treatment at the hospital. The members felt proud to see their contributions finally being used for good. Brother Dan was happy to see the changes. This is what a church should be. Some church members wanted Pastor Emmanuel to face justice for his actions. They reported the matter to the authorities, who started an investigation. Meanwhile, Pastor Emmanuel was hiding in another town. He heard that people were looking for him and became very worried. What if they arrest me? He thought. But Pastor Emmanuel didn't feel sorry for what he had done. Instead, he was angry that his plans had failed. That Brother Dan has ruined everything, he said bitterly. The church members saw Brother Dan's honesty and hard work. They decided to make him the new assistant leader of the church under Brother John. Brother Dan was surprised. I never thought I would lead people, he said, but I will do my best to serve God and the church. Under his leadership, the church began to grow again. More people joined, and the congregation felt closer than ever. One night, while sitting alone in his small rented room, Pastor Emmanuel began to think about his actions. He remembered how the church members had trusted him and how he had betrayed them. Maybe I was wrong, he said to himself. But the thought of admitting his mistakes made him feel ashamed. How can I face them after everything I've done? Pastor Emmanuel decided to write a letter to the church, apologizing for his actions. He hoped they would forgive him, even if he couldn't return. One Sunday morning, the congregation received an unexpected letter. It was from Pastor Emmanuel. Brother John opened it and read it aloud to the church. I am deeply sorry for the pain I caused you all, the letter said. I know I betrayed your trust, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. Please pray for me as I try to change my ways. Some members were moved to tears. He knows he did wrong, Sister Amoka said softly. Others were not convinced. He should face justice, not just apologize, one man said. The church decided to forgive Pastor Emmanuel, but agreed to let the authorities handle the case. With new leadership, the church focused on helping the community. They organized food drives, supported widows, and paid school fees for children in need. Brother Dan worked hard to make sure every kobo was used wisely. The church members admired his honesty. He is a true servant of God, they said. One day, Sister Amoka brought her son to church. Thank you all for helping me when I needed it most, she said with tears in her eyes. The church clapped and praised God for the boy's recovery. Meanwhile, Pastor Emmanuel's troubles grew worse. The authorities found evidence of his misuse of church funds. They arrested him and brought him to court. At the trial, Pastor Emmanuel admitted everything. I was greedy and wrong, he said. The judge sentenced him to community service and ordered him to repay some of the stolen money. The news spread quickly, and people talked about it everywhere. Some were angry, while others prayed for him to change his ways. The church members reflected on the events that had unfolded. We must never blindly follow anyone, Brother John said during a Sunday service. Let us always seek God's guidance in everything we do. The congregation agreed. They decided to be more involved in church decisions and ensure transparency in handling money. Brother Dan encouraged everyone to learn from the experience. God used this situation to teach us a lesson, he said. We should always stand for the truth, no matter how hard it is. As time passed, the church grew stronger. The members became closer, and their faith deepened. They welcomed new people with open arms and shared their story as a lesson in honesty and forgiveness. Brother Dan felt grateful to be part of such a loving community. This is what the church should be, a family that helps one another and stands for truth, he said. The congregation continued to pray for Pastor Emmanuel, hoping he would truly change. They also prayed for strength to keep doing God's work faithfully. After completing his community service, Pastor Emmanuel decided to turn his life around. He started attending a small church in the neighboring town, sitting quietly in the back pew. The pastor of the church, Pastor Emmanuel, noticed him one day and asked, "Are you new here?" Pastor Emmanuel nodded. "I used to lead a church, but I failed my congregation. I'm here to start over and learn how to truly serve God," he said honestly. Pastor Emmanuel welcomed him warmly. "Everyone deserves a second chance," he said. Back at the church, Brother Dan thought of new ways to keep the congregation involved. He suggested they form small groups where members could pray, study the Bible, and share their challenges. The idea worked well. People became more active in the church, and the small groups brought them closer together. One of the groups started a business to support unemployed members. "We can use our skills to lift each other up," Sister Amoka said, leading the initiative. The church became a model for unity and progress. Pastor Emmanuel found it difficult to adjust to his new life. He missed the comfort of his old lifestyle, but reminded himself that greed had led to his downfall. One day, during a Bible study at his new church, the topic was humility. The words touched his heart. "God humbles us to teach us," Pastor Emmanuel said. Pastor Emmanuel decided to share his story with the group. "I was once a pastor who misused my position. I hurt many people, but now I want to live differently," he confessed. The group encouraged him, saying, "God's grace is enough for you." One Sunday, Pastor Emmanuel received a surprise visitor, Brother Dan. "I heard you're here," Brother Dan said with a kind smile. Pastor Emmanuel felt nervous. "Are you here to judge me?" he asked. "No," Brother Dan replied. "I came to see how you're doing and to let you know the church forgives you. We're praying for you." Pastor Emmanuel's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," he said. "Your courage exposed my wrongs, and it saved me from going further down the wrong path." Months later, the church in Abuja celebrated its anniversary. It was a joyful day filled with songs, testimonies, and thanksgiving. During the service, Brother Dan shared a short message. "Our church has been through many challenges, but God has been faithful. Let us continue to be a light in our community," he said. The members agreed. They felt proud of how far they had come. From the ashes of betrayal, they had built a stronger, more united church. Dear viewers, thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed this interesting story and want to know what happens next, leave a comment saying Part 2. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you'll be notified when the next episode is released. Thank you again for watching.